Welcome to Weekend Watches. That's right, I am taking the Watches Live format and making it part of your Sunday morning. This is the first of a regular series. We're going to be here same time, same place every week with a huge array of watches, complications, simple timepieces, dress watches, and sports watches. Remember, if you're watching this Sunday, you have only a few hours left to click the link in the description and enter to win that Omega Railmaster. Let's get started. You guys can see that I am all about the casual Friday right now because I am in fact filming this on Friday afternoon. How about a watch to match my shirt? Well, back in 2004, Panerai reminded us that there are Panerai Luminor Submersibles, and then there are Luminor Submersibles. And the PAM 194 is exactly that. This is a Kraken for your wrist, an immense Luminor Submersible 1950 case, 47 millimeters, as hard as a rock and just as imposing. It has a crystal 5.9 millimeters thick. You can see just how thick that sapphire is. Rotating bezel, helium escape valve, 2,500 meter water resistance, and get this, it's a GPHG luminary, meaning it won the sports watch category at the then 4-year-old GPHG, the Oscars of watchmaking, in 2004. A 1-year only run. You can see this was a limited series of 1,000 pieces. Throwing it on the wrist, you can see a lovely bellows style Panerai vulcanized rubber diving strap that does beautifully match my shirt. It's surprisingly wearable. I expected this to be a little bit comical, and though the size is certainly overpowering, nevertheless, it is within the bounds of my wrist and it is sitting comfortably. I could actually wear this thing with great comfort on a vacation, on a weekend, at the beach, on my off day, or on casual Friday. And I'll also mention this, the timepiece being both decorated and incredibly tough is your luxury timepiece to wear when things get exceptionally rough. Listen to the bezel detent on this timepiece and you'll see exactly what it's made of. Or perhaps I should say, you will hear. That is belt-fed rapid fire right there. Seriously tough, as sharp as a rifle bolt, and you can see the entire bezel, either polished and relieved indices and numerals or satin finished. No aluminum insert, no ceramic to fracture. What a monster. And of course the iconic device protecting the crown. It's also a COSC certified Swiss chronometer, so it's both brains and brawn in one. Now let's talk about another sports watch that's from a more recent release. This one only 12 months old. I promised you Vacheron and I'm delivering right here. You've got your thumbnail watch if you're watching. This is the clickbait that caused you to join me today. The Vacheron Constantin Overseas Chronograph, 42.5 millimeters in stainless steel. It's the inverse Panda Dial that debuted back in 2018. Now, of course, the Generation 3 Overseas, which this is, bowed as a collection back at SIHH 2016, and it's starting to gain the renown and the market momentum that it rightly deserves. Easy watches to wear. You can see the timepiece features a wonderful quick release lug system that allows you to fit the accessory straps, and it comes with 2 of them, both leather and rubber. And I should mention the accessory straps arrive with a separate deployant clasp. How good is the value here? Well, you're getting what is unarguably a more highly developed watch than any Audemars Piguet Royal Oak and any Patek Philippe Nautilus, as the investment is recent. The technology and the benefits are real. 150 meters water resistant. It's an anti-magnetic watch to 25,000 ampere per meter. Remember, 4,800 ampere per meter is the ISO standard of a anti-magnetic watch, so this is multiples of that. The timepiece with a manufacturer movement caliber 5100 that has a 54-hour power reserve, both a vertical clutch and a column wheel. We're going to turn this one over and you're going to see the first ever display case back on a Vacheron Constantin Overseas. And of course, because this is the Generation 3 Overseas, we're going to be talking not just about Geneva hallmark on the movement, which it has, but Geneva hallmark on the case, which it has also. You could see since 2012, a full watch standard, the Geneva hallmark is the imprimatur of fine finish and execution inside and out. Côte de Genève across the bridges, you can see black polished screw heads. There's a black polished cap on the regulator of the balance. You can see the 22 karat gold winding mass has been engraved with a lovely compass rose pattern. The center is chiseled. There's satin finish outboard and more satin finish just outboard of that. So you can see that there are 3 different types of finish. There is a matte satin, there's a chiseled finish, and then there's a linear brushed satin outboard. Absolutely gorgeous. And you wonder, how can they have an anti-magnetic watch with a display case back? There is a paramagnetic ring that runs all the way around the watch movement, and it channels the field lines around the movement without obscuring the case back. They thought of everything. Now let's talk about a sports watch that's not exactly true vintage, but it's getting there. 1995, you might remember, the 25th anniversary of Apollo 13. You saw the movie, now own the watch. This is the Omega Speedmaster Professional Moon Watch, and it is the Apollo 13 25th anniversary limited edition of 999 pieces. You can see the mission patch of Apollo 13 on the gloriously faded original tritium dial. They didn't switch over to Luminova on the Speedmasters or the Speedmaster Professionals until after 1997. This being a 95 watch, you have tritium as well as that lovely shield, adding 2 splashes of color. 42 millimeters in stainless steel. You can see the case is in excellent condition. The break between the case flanks and the bevels is still sharp. The lovely and evocative Hesselite plexiglass over the dial, powered by the Moonwatch caliber 861. Let's open up the clasp. You can see the case back, featuring the notation of the limited edition, as well as the original factory sticker. This one's largely untouched. Now throw it on the wrist. It's a classical Moonwatch fit. Easy to wear, flatter than you might expect, at just under 14 millimeters thick. It's a timepiece that must have been huge back in 1970 when Apollo 13 flew. Today, it feels properly sized for a men's sports chronograph, so this is an enduring design in more ways than one, still feeling properly sized and proportioned for our era, and still, it should be mentioned, the watch issued by NASA to this day. All right, closer to the ground, a ground-bound sports watch. Let's talk about a motorsports sports watch, launched in 2017 as part of the partnership between Bell & Ross and the Renault Sport Formula One team. This is the BRX1 RS17, and you can see 250-piece limited edition. It's a combination of rubber, forged carbon fiber, titanium, and ceramic. The case assembled by G&F Chatelain, which is one of the finest case makers in Switzerland, owned by Chanel. Like Bell & Ross, Chatelain builds cases for the gods. Everyone from MB&F to, I would even say, Richard Mille has used their components, making this a watch that has impeccable pedigree. Bell & Ross design, remember the company's based out of Paris, but they assemble in Switzerland and they use top-flight suppliers. Now the module on top of the chronograph has been blackened and skeletonized. So here you can see the caliber straight through the dial. Everything is mounted on a sapphire below the sapphire. You have 5-second sweeps in broken colors around the dial to make it easier to read the chronograph, and then you have a tachymeter scale outboard in forged carbon that allows you to gauge the speed of an object over a fixed distance, such as a kilometer or a mile. Note there are no units, so you can time on either. Now the watch is 45 millimeters in diameter, and you can see, though it's a 45, it doesn't wear that way. The lugs are short, stubby, and tightly downturned, so even on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, this is a timepiece that wears quite easily. Light on the wrist with its carbon, its rubber, its sapphire, its titanium, and its ceramic. It feels, eyes closed, as light as a 42 or a 41 millimeter round watch in steel might be. And while $24,000 was a steep ask for this watch back in 2017, today, pre-owned, the value proposition as a Royal Oak Offshore or Hublot Big Bang alternative makes a lot more sense. Okay, enough of the sports watches. Let's talk about our dress watches. Let's talk about a watch with which I have a intimate personal connection. Now this year, Arnold & Son will be auctioning a DSTB, a dial side true beat, after this exact design for the only watch auction benefiting research into Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And I narrated the trailer for the Arnold & Son only watch that will be shown at the auction. This model right here is the DSTB in white gold, 43.5 millimeters, that came out in 2016 as a limited edition of 125 pieces. You can see a rose lathe cut 18 karat rose gold rotor on the case back, Côte de Soleil exploding across the bridges like a sunburst, fire blued screws, bridges with a mirrored and fat anglage on their edge, micro engine turning on the base plate. It is a gorgeous Arnold & Son caliber 6003 automatic winding 45-hour power reserve. It drives a dial side anchor escapement system that traces a superimposed sapphire seconds track over the primary dial. And note the explosive and radiant blue brushed metallic finish of the base of the dial. Extraordinary finish, and I must say, original design. This is a watch that has sufficient heft to feel like luxury, even with eyes closed, but at less than 50 millimeters lug to lug, it wears easily on a small wrist. The timepiece is, of course, 43.5 millimeters in diameter, but relatively slender at around 13.5 millimeters thick. This is one that can fit underneath the cuff with a lush and box-sectioned domed sapphire over the dial. An extraordinary watch from a very underrated brand. Now, speaking about extraordinary watches, let's talk about a brand that I wouldn't necessarily call underrated. Let's say they're rated. And this isn't the Wednesday show with Brian, so there's only going to be one FP Journe on this program, but it's a prince. It's the Chronomètre Souverain Black Label. Now, of course, the Black Label, which is a boutique espace exclusive and also constrained in its total production per model per year. This is the 40mm platinum version. The Black Label is not just a boutique and espace exclusive, it is also a watch you can only buy if you have previously purchased a new FP Journe timepiece. A lovely black dial, platinum case, 40mm. You can see the case back. The caliber 1304, so named because it measures 13 French lignes, and development started in 2004. Twin mainspring barrels, you can see the bridges and the plates are 18 karat rose gold. Really, we should call it red gold. It is not pink, it is not rose, it is red. Now note the different finishing and the hidden train. The drive train goes underneath the dial. It's not visible on the caseback, so there's a huge open channel between the twin mainspring barrels and the escapement in the balance. And that channel features an immense expanse that allows you to enjoy the finishing. You can see it as a sort of soleil finishing across the base plate, contrasting with the Côte de Genève across the top of the bridges. And then there is a tight engine-turned perlage underneath the balance and adjacent to the half bridge for the balance. A big, slow-beating 21/6 balance that's free-sprung. You will note that it features an overcoil architecture and it's adjusted in a chronometer-busting 6 positions. Journe does not chronometer certify his chronomètre. Instead, he simply says that his standards exceed those of the COSC. Now let's throw this one on the wrist. 40mm means it's still a very wearable watch, and you can see it is also limpet flat on the wrist. It clings easily, it ducks underneath the cuff, it wears well even on a small wrist, and I can pronounce it a viable unisex option with a lug-to-lug dimension of about 48mm. This is an easy and agreeable fit, but such mass and class on the wrist. Jumping along in our discussion of dress watches, let's finish our underrated brands, at least in the dress watch segment. Let's discuss Breguet, because this is the Swatch Group flagship, in theory, that almost no one talks about. Why? Well, the watches are poorly marketed and the brand itself flies below the radar. Here we have an extraordinary Breguet 7137BA in yellow gold, 39mm. The dial itself is cut on a rose lathe. Look how many different patterns. You have that satin finish. You have the dimple style minutes track outboard. You have an extraordinary looping soleil sunburst style pattern at the center of the radial date. You have a billowing, almost fan-like pattern under the power reserve. And of course, you have a lovely freehand engraved moon phase with a melancholy moon and sun. The dial is solid gold, which is then cut on a rose lathe by a guilloche and then silvered. So a solid gold dial, a solid gold watch, only 8.65mm thick, and you can see on the case back, caliber 502.3. It's based on a Frédéric Piguet P71, a 3/4 style rotor, micro ultra thin. It is a very slender movement. You can see that this one is exquisitely decorated and customized for Breguet use. A timepiece that wears quite easily even on a small wrist. This is another wonderful unisex option that just smacks of gravitas. A brand that has it all going on from an artisanal standpoint. Get ahead of the curve and prove you know more about the watch space than your friends at the Watch Club, at the Red Bar, at SIHH or Basel when you walk the floor. Wear the watch no one's talking about that has all of the substance and the style to match. Breguet, even within Swatch Group, has become a best-kept secret among watch collectors today. Let's go back to sports watches for a bit. Let's talk about a timepiece that, frankly, gets not enough press. I would say that any Rolex in general is going to be overhyped. But when we talk about Rolex Explorers today, I hear a lot of talk about vintage, and I hear a lot of talk about the post-2010 39.5mm case. What I don't often hear is about the 2001 to 2010 114270, and that's what we have here, the most elemental of Rolex sports watches, redolent of the adventure of summiting Everest with Norgay and Hillary. This is a timepiece that has changed precious little and retains its classical 36mm Rolex case profile. Now, of course, an oyster case, tri-Arabic numerals. This is a gloss black lacquer dial of the Luminova era. This is a late series timepiece built towards the end of the run, so it's got all the standards right down to solid end links, a chronometer certified movement. Of course, you have white gold features, hands, numerals, and indices on the dial, and this one wears quite easily and effortlessly. I love the fact that though this is a fairly recent watch, just over a decade old. Nevertheless, it's a timepiece with its hollow center links and its evocative style and size that feels like a new manufacturer vintage watch. If you love classical Rolex, but you don't want to play in the realm of the 50s, 60s, and 70s where the snakes lurk and hype is rife, get something like this from the 2000s, a 114270. It's the all-the-time watch, and as you can see, it's the all-the-time watch for any wrist size. While we're on a Rolex roll, we may as well hit the other Explorer, the Explorer II. Now, from the same time frame, we're talking about the old 40mm 16570 stainless steel polar dial. It is a true dual time, and as you can see, those gorgeous blackened indices on the polar dial in a 40mm case. For a lot of folks, this is the way to go. It's a little bit more modern than some others. This is a Y series with solid end links, but you still have those evocative strap tool apertures on the flank. You can also see that this one bears a lot of marks, scratches, and scuffs and nicks, but it also has evidence of all of the original factory metal in that it's minimally refinished. Between a polished watch and original factory metal, give me the worn factory metal every time. Now, throwing it on the wrist, it is larger than the Explorer 1 from that period. Nevertheless, it's important to note that the timepiece won't be compared to the Explorer 1 so much as the 42mm current generation Explorer 2. If you love the Explorer lineage and style and the polar dial, but you can't quite wear the new watch, this is the way to go. And these are long-term bids to perhaps become more serious collectibles. They will have their turn in the vintage genre, and that's coming up fairly shortly. So get ahead of the curve and buy a watch that remains modern and wearable in every respect, right down to its swimmability to this day. It's a great long-term bet, but buy it to enjoy in the present. Now, the funny thing is, Omega came awfully close to paralleling that watch with its GMT. The Seamaster GMT, that is. This is a watch from the early 2000s featuring the dial that debuted with the GMT in 1998, which is to say it is the Maxi Index broadsword dial that came out in 98 with the Seamaster GMT. Still 300 meters water resistant, 41 millimeters in diameter. It's a true dual time, and I will say, although the bracelet is sized with pins and sleeves, the bracelet and the clasp on this watch feel dramatically more substantial than what you get on the Explorer. Omega was milling its clasps back then, whereas Rolex was essentially stamping them, and this just feels more expensive than the Rolex, even though they are of similar vintage, and in the day this would have cost less than the Rolex. The good news for collectors who want the best, this still costs less than the Rolex. It's a lovely dual-time swimmable chronometer. It has the fun of a GMT bezel. It has the hale and hearty sensibility of a Seamaster Diver 300 meter from the Bond series, and has a bracelet that I find a little bit more butch and masculine than the standard interspersed link, polished and satin finished Bond bracelet. So this one is a handsome, versatile, and desirable timepiece. Now we're going to go way upscale. We've talked about some sports watches, and we're going to talk about a watch that straddles I would say the line between sports and dress. This is the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Perpetual Calendar. This is the 26574 OR watch that came out in 2015. You can see this is the combination of the red gold with the blue Grand Tapisserie dial cut on a pantograph, the lovely galvanized blue hobnail, and you can see a cruciform symmetry about the dial. You have 4 scales, including a monocounter at 12 o'clock with the leap year and the month, but what set this generation apart, other than the 41mm case size, is the radial indicator for the week of the year, right up to 52. That flange adds extra depth and luster to the metallic dial, and you can see that the moon phase disc is glittering aventurine with a photorealistic moon. Turn it all over, and you can see the DNA of the original Royal Oak Jumbo. Doing business on the case back. This is the Movement 5134 Audemars Piguet 38 jewels. It is made in-house, even though it's based on the ancient Jaeger-LeCoultre 920 of Bausch. Free-sprung with a Gyromax balance and a rose gold rotor. You can see the annular ring that wraps all the way around the movement. The rotor sits on that. The rotor sits on the ring that is borne by 4 ruby-jeweled rollers, bearings made of ruby that prevent this railed rotor from coming in contact with the bridges or the plates. That's how the movement can be so slim. And with the underlying JLC being extremely slender, the entire movement in this Perpetual calendar is only 4.31 millimeters thick, meaning the entire watch on your wrist is only 9.5 millimeters thick, and my goodness, is it striking. We're going to continue with watches that straddle the line between sports and dress, and De Bethune of L'Auberson is certainly in that category with its DB28. It is bold, it is aggressive, it is black, it is stark, and all in zirconium, 42.7 millimeters. You could easily make the argument that this is a sporting timepiece, and yet it is thin in profile. The timepiece is slimmer than a Rolex Submariner. It's slimmer than a Rolex Daytona. It's under 12 millimeters thick. It also features the rarely seen De Bethune short lugs. So across the wrist, they're 47.5 to 51 millimeters. I should explain this if you haven't seen one of these before. The lugs are mobile and spring-loaded so they conform to your wrist. Now, throwing it on my wrist one more time, you can see how slender it is. And you can see that the dial is explosive. Vertical Côte de Genève on the delta-shaped barrel bridge. You can see twin mainspring barrels underneath. I'm going to hold it steady so you can get a little bit closer. We're going to get super close now, and we're going to talk about the details. You see those twin mainspring barrels? Manual wind. They give the watch a 6-day power reserve. Now you can see at the top of my wrist, which would be the bottom of the watch, there is a spherical moon phase, which is made of darkened palladium, or I should say darkened steel and white palladium. There's a full balance bridge. I'm going to turn this over. We're going to stay close hold. We're going to go back to the macro camera, and you can see that everything is made by DB. There's shock protection on both sides of the balance bridge, which is completely rounded and black polished. So you have triple parachute shock protection. You have Inca block for the balance staff at center, a solid disc of silicon for the balance wheel with a white gold rim, and you can see that even the hairspring with its off-centered kind of oblong shape, that is designed to beat concentric like a Breguet overcoil without the shock vulnerability of an overcoil. And that spherical moon phase has an accuracy of 122 years. You set it once and it's good for the lifetime of the owner. Now you'll also note there is a small power reserve indicator peeking out underneath the flange for the minutes, and when you turn it all over you can see the large scale power reserve indicator on the reverse side, plus the mechanism that operates the power reserve. This is watchmaking at its finest. Denis Flageolet of De Bethune makes awesome watches. A scientist first, a watchmaker second. He wants his timepieces to be beautiful, and you can see that black polished cover to the barrel bridge certainly is beautiful, but he advances the state of the art. The company has over 6 balance wheel designs and dozens of patents. Only in business since 2002, probably more innovations per watchmaker than any other business in Switzerland. Let's talk about a big aggressive Panerai. Let's talk about a Panerai Luminor Submersible from this model year. Now you remember the 616 Carbotech from 2015. This is the 1616. What changed? Well, there's a new movement inside, the caliber 9010, now a full balance bridge for greater toughness and thinner. The dial has also changed from the Ecru Fotina index system that we had on the original to a new complementary blue tone. Panerai was all about submersibles at SIHH this year as it sought to reconnect with its core male audience after rather weak and generally feminine products presented at SIHH 2018. Smaller watches, ivory dials, white dials. Well, maybe Panerai overcompensated with the testosterone this year, but this is one of the best new efforts, and you can see it's colorful, it's fun, it's carefree, it's carbon fiber, and you can see the layers of the carbon fiber. From the side, you can see how it's milled. No two of these, because of the layup differences, are exactly alike. You can see it continues through the device protecting the crown as well as the bezel itself. And just to remind you that Panerai bezel tech has never stood still, listen to the ratchet on this one. Okay, if the other one was belt fed, that's like an M134 right there. That is sharp. That is the gold standard for bezel ratchet. The way it sounds and the way it feels. All right, I'm having too much fun with that. Keeping my trusty Zin Easy M11 on hand, let's talk about a timepiece that can speak for itself. Now, if you watched the Wednesday show, you probably saw this watch. Let me reintroduce it to those who watch this program exclusively. Made in 1994 in 500 pieces, this was the first expressly built Jaeger-LeCoultre Reverso minute repeater, the first Reverso minute repeater, and the first series production JLC wristwatch to be a minute repeater. 42 millimeters from lug to lug, 25.5 millimeters across the case, and under 10 millimeters thick, it is an extraordinary work of miniaturization, as the entire minute repeater movement needs to fit in the rotating portion of the case. If you want to customize, you can still do so. I recommend not doing so, but this is a rare example among the 500 because it features a beads of rice bracelet, the likes of which I have never seen on this model. I can't tell you how many were made, but I can tell you that I've never seen one in person on the bracelet. Now, of course, this is a watch that speaks for itself. As a minute repeater, we're going to fire it up. We're going to fire it up. You can see that governor on the dial side, and you're going to hear what it sounds like. Audemars Piguet Renault Papi consulted on the design of this minute repeater mechanism. Okay, that's pretty cool. That's hard to top. I'm going to admit that is difficult to one-up. The Reverso, of course, can one-up itself because it's a two-up watch. You can rotate it over and amuse your friends. Force those at the office or perhaps at dinner to guess what you're wearing on your watch when the Reverso case is upside down. And of course you can see the spinning regulator on the dial side. An easy watch to wear even on a small wrist. I actually find this watch is easier to wear on the bracelet than on the strap because you can pull the bracelet straight down, whereas the strap is stiff and fights you. Working our way through the assembled, let's go to a second Reverso. 2 Reversos times 2 sides, 4 different dials on 2 timepieces, and this is the first ever series production Platinum Reverso. It is known as the Platinum Reverso #1. I'm going to denude it of my fingerprints because it deserves better. The Platinum Reverso 1 was a 500-piece limited edition that came out in 2001. Still the same size, the Grand Taille case, 25.5 across, 42 from lug to lug. The watch is entirely platinum, and as you can see, the caliber 849 RSQ, that is rectangular and skeletonized, has been both freehand skeletonized and then freehand engraved, and it still works as a movement. Look at the attention to detail. The Jaeger logo has been etched into the spokes of the open mainspring barrel. You can see JL, 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 and of course, when you turn the watch over, it has been decorated on the reverse side just as exquisitely with the JL logo recapitulated on the reverse. Now this is an ultra-thin movement, only 1.85 millimeters thick when you think about skeletonizing and engraving those components, and yet it all still functions as intended. You realize the depth of expertise at the manufacturer, and unlike Cartier, that sapphire cabochon is the real deal. Throwing this watch on the wrist, I can tell you that it's heavier than the rose gold. Even on the full bracelet, the rose gold doesn't give the same impression as a platinum case, even on a strap. I'll also mention that after 2005, JLC stopped pairing platinum watches with platinum clasps, but prior to 2005, as this watch is, you have a full platinum clasp to match. So this is a timepiece that is not just exquisite, but it's also representative of a period when JLC gave you more for your money. Let's head to the opposite side of the world, where Seurat Su Polish is the rule, and inventive watchmaking always yields something to raise eyebrows and inflame passions. And here we have the SBGM 021, 39.5 millimeters in black polished stainless steel. That is the tin plate executed Seurat Su finish of which I speak. You have a watch that's 39.5 millimeters and built around a lush ivory lacquer dial, a dual time with automatic winding. It has a 72-hour 3-day power reserve, and it is a gloriously glossy dial. And you can see that the calibrations of the GMT as well as the GMT script have been printed in blue on the ivory dial base, whereas the hands, the aperture for the date, and all of the indices have been satined and polished, micrometrically finished by an artisan who only does this with diamond-tipped milling tools, so the case and the dial both are entirely hand executed. This is a handmade and hand finished watch, and of course you can see the quality of that Seurat Su black polish on the flank. It is simply blinding when it catches the light, but from every other angle it looks black. It's like the movement components that you see on Swiss watches. The movement itself here is watchmaker adjusted in 6 positions, not the chronometer standard of 5, and once more, everything's in-house, right down to the shock protection used and the lubricants, which are blended by Seiko and Grand Seiko for their own use. We're blazing, guys. Stay with me here. I've got a few more minutes on my allotted time, and we're going to go back to the year 2000. Y2K was all about the Vacheron resurgence. The Malt Perpetual Calendar Chronograph. This is the reference 47112, 39 millimeters in solid platinum with those expressive Malt-style fluted and flared lugs. The dial featuring a freehand engraved sun and moon on a solid gold disc. You'll also appreciate the Perpetual Calendar, the applique polished dart-style indices and broadsword hands. And of course, this is the watch worn by Colin Farrell as Sonny Crockett in the Miami Vice movie. I get that question a lot. This is that model. Lemania-based Vacheron caliber 1141. Big, slow-beating, 18,000 vibration per hour balance. You could see the mirrored anglage. You can see the satin finish across the levers of the chronograph mechanism. I'm going to remove my fingerprints because unfortunately they are everywhere today. Now you can see a free, unobstructed view of how exquisitely this movement is executed and how deep a traditional column wheel lateral clutch chronograph is. This is about as good as it gets, and of course you get both the display caseback and the solid platinum caseback. You don't get shorted. Note how the caseback is freehand engraved. This is a watch that fires on all cylinders and ticks at a nice slow 18,000. A big slow beat balance. The Lemania Bausch that in another form on another day went to the moon as the Omega Caliber 321. What a watch, and wearable on any wrist. It's less than 14 millimeters thick and once more 39 millimeters in diameter. How do we one-up that? You know what? I'm going back to Panerai. Here's one you probably haven't seen. Do you remember 2014? Do you remember the coolest chronograph of the year? It wasn't a JLC Duomet, it wasn't an Omega Coaxial, it wasn't a Rolex Daytona or a Lange Datograph, and it wasn't from some boutique independent. No, it was from Panerai, the PAM 518 through 520 Radomir 1940 chronograph. That series captured my heart and my imagination. 47 millimeters in platinum, this PAM 518 is a 50-piece limited edition with a lovely SLC-style dial in a matte white with a tachymeter scale outboard, lovely rose gold syringe-style hands, and ticking away underneath the caseback, this is a Minerva 1322. Yes, that Minerva. They have a few hundred watches per year. Let's get that one right in focus. And you could see that this is doing business as Panerai caliber OP25. It's a monster. 22 jewels, beaten away at 18,000 vibrations per hour with a balance that is about 1/3 the entire diameter of the movement. Column wheel, lateral clutch, hand-finished, mirrored anglage, black polished screws with chamfered slots. The edge of every bridge broad, bright, and optically smooth. You can see, as I actuate the chronograph, just how open and visible this style of chronograph is. You can see the black polished swan's neck regulator, the 18,000 beat balance, and the huge Breguet overcoil that sits underneath it. This is as good as it gets, and this is as romantic as traditional Swiss watchmaking gets. Keep in mind, guys, this platinum 50-piece limited edition features the same heart and soul as the Mont Blanc Villeret series. And on the wrist, oh my gosh, the platinum of this watch, the heft is incredible. And you can see the watch even has a lovely box section and domed crystal that gives you that wonderful off-axis distortion of a vintage watch. This is a timepiece with a movement whose design began back in 1922. That's what 1322 means. 13 lean and 22 being 1922, the year work started. It's a Rod 1940 case, so it has those strong thrusting rather than wire style lugs. This is the most impressive chronograph on the table tonight, and it was my choice for the greatest chronograph of SIHH or even Baselworld 2014. We're staying big, but we're going back to the sports watches, a brand that I will always hold dear because back when I was nobody at Watch You Want, Linde Werdelin came on my show when I was filming it on a shoestring budget in a business park in Florida, and the founder of Linde Werdelin sat for a discussion of the industry, his brand, what it's like to start a watch brand, and what it's like to create a watch. And this is the 2012 Linde Werdelin Oktopus II. Now, it's a limited edition in titanium with a ceramic bezel, a combination of silver and black and yellow. The timepiece, it features a docking port on each wing. You can see at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. This dramatic double-digit date diver allows you to dock it with a Reef diving computer, which has backlight, data recording, multiple depth meters, alarms, everything, including a depth gauge, naturally. So you can put that computer on the mechanical watch and turn it into a professional diving instrument, not a parody of a vintage dive watch like a Submariner or a Seamaster, but a real modern diving instrument. Now, the watch comes from a company that only makes about 400 watches a year, so production is scarce. Over the first 10 years, they made only 4,500 watches. You can see the turbine-like double-digit date at the top. The movement made by Dubois de Praz is a caliber 14,580. It has an ETA base and a DD module. And again, I mentioned that this is a limited edition, and it is a very limited edition. 88 pieces with a laser-etched octopus as drawn by Linde Werdelin's business partner and industrial designer, Morten Linde. It is a two-up Danish-Swiss company that manufactures in Switzerland, designs in Denmark, the best fusion of Danish design and Swiss precision you could ever want. Now, 300 meters water resistant. The timepiece also wears easily in titanium. It's nice and light. It's 44 millimeters in diameter, but you can see 46 millimeters lug to lug means it wears well even on a small wrist. These guys used to have pretty goofy and I might even say provocative comic books advertising their timepieces, so they've always been willing to take a risk and do things unusual. And of course, getting in with a pre-owned guy back before anyone knew who he was unusual. What else do we have, guys? Oh, we have so many watches and so little time. Let's talk about the watch that should finish any episode of this show. Let's talk about a watch that represents one of my few enduring grails. Let's talk about a watch that you know and love, which has created a legend around itself since the first example debuted back in 2009. One of the three canonical modern Lange watches with the Datejust and the Lange 1, this is the Zeitwerk. Gorgeous pink gold, 42 millimeters, jumping hours and minutes, a digital display featuring a movement that actually features on the dial. You can see this time bridge is made of German silver. It features a clear sapphire pivot for the minutes wheel, and it is actually part of the movement. Turn it all over, and you could see the rest of the movement. This is caliber L043. You could see that there is a Maltese cross style stop works that will stop the movement when power runs so low that it can no longer jump the minutes. Now, when you move down, you can see that there is another time bridge on the caseback. It starts with a pinwheel-like air brake that slows the power transmission as it jumps through the minutes and into a train that features a separate locking pawl and anchor system, and then two superimposed third wheels with a hairspring between them. That's a remontoir d'égalité circular spiral hairspring reserve of power that acts as a constant force device, ensuring that the 18,000 vibration per hour balance always receives the same amount of energy. And you can see it just fired again. That is a constant force device in a digital jump hour, jump minute. You could see that the balance is huge and slow. You could see that the half bridge for the balance is freehand engraved. And you could see that the entirety of the movement is exquisitely finished. German silver bridges, nickel, copper, zinc in a lovely glowing gold. You could see the engine turn perlage. You could see the black polished cap to the escape wheel and the swan's neck regulator. You could see the three-quarter style bridge, evocative of German pocket watches of the 19th century. You could see within the time bridge, jewels are fixed to the bridge with screw-fixed chaton. So another nod to watchmaking in the 19th century. You have both blued and black polished screws on this caseback and exquisite glasuta stripes, because we're not in Switzerland. Those are not Côte de Genève. I'm going to throw this one on the wrist and give you a sense of how the Zeitwerk works. A timepiece that is a grail by any definition. This example, 42 millimeters in rose gold, is not a big bully. It's the largest of the big three Lange watches, and yet it's still wearable on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference. Guys, please, before I get there, live my dream and give this one a warm welcome to your home. Thank you, everyone who joined us. I appreciate you joining in and making Weekend Watches one a success. I'm going to be watching the comments all day Sunday and beyond, so let me know what you thought beneath, and let me know what watches you would like to see in the future. Remember, click the link in the description to win that Omega Seamaster Railmaster. I will be making the announcement literally tomorrow on my Watches Tonight show. Thanks to you, thanks to my crew, Time Out, Tim Out. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and thanks for logging on.